First-time speaker, Councillor Collins.
Thank you. I want to address the Rapid Ready report if I could, and my question would be to Jim Doms. The Rapid Ready report says, the one that we all voted for, and I'm quoting it verbatim, it would not, sorry, is Jim not here? Well, anyone who chooses to answer this then. It would not be productive for Hamilton to build light rail while maintaining 30-minute headways on regular transit routes serving LRT. Perhaps more importantly, early and significant investments in base transit levels are required. As I asked, my question would be, based on that statement, as I asked at the LRT the Rapid Ready report strongly mentions in several instances, and this probably being the most definitive, transit investments are required prior to, it would not be productive for Hamilton to build LRT without substantial transit investments. Quite clear, that money did not come. How are we funding that between now and the time that LRT opens?
Who would like to venture an answer? Mr. Murray.
Sure.
Brave and bold.
Just so as we're clear, I mean, when that report was presented here and reviewed and questions asked by this committee, we took it upon ourselves to make sure that the province of Ontario, in particular Metrolinx, had a copy of it and was able to digest what was in it. So notwithstanding what the report said and the concerns that were expressed in it, I think by staff at the time, I would assume or presume that Metrolinx understood the details of that report, and having considered it, chose to and decided to invest $1 billion in Hamilton for LRT. So I'm not sure what the councillor is saying, but so the bottom line, the Councillor Whitehead I'm referring to. So the bottom line is that information was provided to the province, and notwithstanding what it says, certainly it agreed that the investment that we have in front of us that staff are working to implement was taken in consideration.
Okay, thank you for that, Chris. That question probably should have been directed to Metrolinx representatives. You know, the report goes on to state, and I'm not going to read the whole thing, but another key point says Rapid Ready focuses on three key ingredients, that are necessary to support rapid transit investment. First one and foremost, building on an integrated transit network and growing ridership. Again, it's back to this investment that was required to grow ridership, and I made sure that when the LRT, if it's constructed and when it's constructed at some point in time in the future, whenever that is, the day that it opens, there will be a ridership that is larger than the one that it's replacing. And so I'm questioning, and I have questioned, where those investments come from. And when I asked informally Mr. Doms earlier, I understand that it's still under review and something will be back in front of council either later this year or later this term that deals with that, as I've referred to it, as the elephant in the room. It's $100 million in capital investment that wasn't funded, that we asked for. That was the first phase of this project. We haven't received any word from the province in terms of what's coming, and I can only assume that those investments are now a price tag that, or an investment that the City of Hamilton is required to fund. Is that a safe assumption?
To Mr. Hope. Is that the staff member you'd like this directed to, Councillor Collins? Mr. Hope.
So the question is, why has the province not decided to invest the $300 million? I can't really speak for decisions that the province has made. What I can say is that the investment we've been asked to implement is the funding commitment through the $1 billion for the LRT.
I want to then refer to the Canadian Urban Institute document that is held up as, I think, the document that illustrates that there is economic uplift argument to be had with LRT. And if I could ask through you maybe to, I'm not certain of whether this should be to finance or to someone from the LRT office, but the Canadian Urban Institute document illustrates that there's a template within the document that shows if you do not build the LRT, Hamilton will see a certain amount of investment. Number that is quoted there, I don't have it in front of me. I think it's 36 projects. That was for Eastgate to McMaster. The scaled down version now of LRT goes from 108 projects with LRT on that line, and now to the shorter route, it says 97 projects. So 97 projects are with the partial LRT, 35 of which would be built without it. So now we're down to 60, if following with the math. So we're poised to see 60 new developments, according to the Canadian Urban Institute's document, which we've used as the economic uplift document. And I'd like to ask Finance whether or not the expropriation related to the construction of the bus stops or the LRT stops have been factored into that Canadian Urban Institute document.
To Mike.
For you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, the document that the councillor is referring to, it's a 2010 document. At the time that the assessment uplift and the tax benefits were being estimated as to what would be required as it relates to acquisition to support the LRT. So the short answer would be no. I don't believe in terms of those estimates that any foregone tax revenue or costs have been incorporated in those forecasts. And again, it is a 2010 report. It made a number of assumptions, and since that time, there's been changes in terms of development along that corridor that would impact those forecasts.
Part of those, one of the big changes on the corridor, which one of those sites, probably the largest site on the LRT corridor in the Canadian Urban Institute's document that speaks to economic uplift, is the Scott Park site. And it is included in one of those 60 properties that we're to see development. I confirm with you then, the current status of that property is now all institutional. As Mr. Zagaric has articulated, we've made the decision to build a rec center with a school, other institutional uses on site, and as I understand it, that entire site now is no longer part of the economic uplift document. Is that a safe assumption?
Mr. Zagaric.
So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, in terms of what may be left in terms of available land in that precinct to support LRT, I suspect it is limited relative to what was back in 2010. I just want to remind committee, back in 2010, the assumption was that that precinct would be available principally to support LRT and development that relates or aligns to LRT. And since that time, with the support of the senior center, recreation center, and school board property in the stadium, the scope or availability of land relative to 2010 is quite limited. And again, that particular precinct did represent back in 2010, and in the assumptions of Canadian Urban Institute, it did represent the largest parcel of public land in terms of their benefit estimation.
So to be clear, I just want to reiterate, 60 buildings, net 60 buildings, after the line was shortened. 60 buildings to come down. I think we've heard that number. Could be a little higher, maybe a little bit lower. We'll know, I think, by the end of the summer. My question would be along those lines then, who will track the net gain or the net loss as it relates to new assessment?
Eric.
So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, technically, Finance would be tracking. You'll recall that through each budget cycle, we make assumptions as it relates to write-offs or adjustments, assessment write-offs or adjustments. It would affect our levy. If there were to be a reduction in assessment base because of those acquisitions, the offsetting impact would be on our levy, and we would be reporting that through the budget process.
That information flow through the committee? My question would be around if 60 buildings are purchased, there's taxes that are currently being paid by commercial operators and residential. Left guessing right now in terms of what 60 buildings down. There will be people living in those buildings. So So I wonder who's keeping track of what we've lost through the start of that process, and then hopefully there's a flip side of that coin is someone will track what the gain is based on the Canadian Urban Institute documents. So that I understand finance does that in a global way through the budget process, and that's valuable information that we get every year. But as I had asked for this year with the budget process, I asked for the heat maps to show where we were seeing the most investment and where we had some challenges with tax assessment losses. That map clearly showed us that, we were growing in the areas, we weren't growing in the areas where we had hoped. So I want to ensure that, I want some commitment, and maybe it's from Mr. Murray Johnson, that at some point in time, that information will flow through the committee. Back of that. Is that possible to do?
I saw an indication from Mr. Johnson.
Through the Deputy Mayor, absolutely we can do that work. And just on the question of taxes, Metrolinx will be paying taxes in lieu. So in terms of the municipal taxes, that will not be lost revenue to us. They will apply for an exemption from the education tax component of it, but in terms of our taxes, they'll go through that process with us. So there was a question at one point about whether the taxes are lost altogether. There's no taxes on those properties. The answer to that is no. It'll be they'll be part of the PILs that we have on various occasions here. The other piece is that as properties, if they are used for another use, through Metrolinx, a commercial use, either leasing to tenants or other businesses, they would pay the full property tax calculation. And I think the final piece just on the acquisition side is that it's the full expectation that some portions of properties, if there is a full property take, we're not anticipating needing for the project the whole property, and that will come back on the market. So as part of the tracking, to the councillor's point, we'll make sure that sometimes it's lost, but then it'll be gained on that same property over a period of time as well, and can easily be tracking that and reporting that through the committee as well.
So the business closures, and thanks for that, Paul, through you, Mr. Chairman. Business closures will be part of that key performance indicator chart.
Through Deputy Mayor, yes, and that's part of the rationale for having our Community Connector program twice a year, is that we'll actually be able to track some of that change that's happening on the ground, because some of it, of course, is hard to track. It's not announced publicly, perhaps, but we'll find that out as we go through. There's a database of information being collected on all 991 properties, so we'll be able to show that change over time, and that is part of the reporting that will be coming out of that Community Connector program.
And we will be, just to be clear, using the Canadian document as the baseline document to compare what we anticipated would be built without LRT and what would.
The Deputy Mayor, certainly one of our baseline documents, yes.
And who's keeping track of the closures during the construction? Talked about the expropriation, seller willing buyer scenario that you referenced earlier. There's certainly two issues there, but there will be closures. Construction process on those properties along the line, that's part of that key performance indicator.
Deputy Mayor, just to be clear, our work on collecting information along that corridor is every property twice a year through the entire length of the process. So we'll see that pre-construction, during construction. So yes, you'll get that information on an ongoing basis.
On the province's $1 billion cap, how was James Street North referenced by the Premier?
The Deputy Mayor, the project scope announced by the Premier included that. The North Spur, the full distance of that North Spur was a little bit of where the discussion has been. So how far that North Spur can go is what we're trying to incorporate within the billion. I think the school of thought thinking is that overall it's the same amount of length of LRT. At the end of the day, we've shortened the east link and then extended the North Spur.
So sorry, that last part again. The eastern important to accommodate James Street North.
Through Deputy Mayor, no. In terms of the overall amount, though, the shortened component on the east is offset by the North Spur. So the thinking is that from a budgetary perspective, it actually nets out very close to where we were in terms of total LRT track length.
Perfect. Thank you for that. If it goes over budget, how do we prevent the city from getting stuck? Ask that in the context of Red Hill. If you look at because of the length of time it took to study and then subsequently build Red Hill, 3 different parties represented the province through that process. 3 different parties had 3 different parties offered 3 different funding scenarios, some more generous than others. How do we avoid that? And through that process, let me be clear, the city was stuck with higher costs. How do we avoid that through the LRT? Part question, does it mean that the project changes to accommodate the billion, or is there a scenario in which the city would pick up extra?
To the Deputy Mayor, it's been confirmed the province is funding 100% of the capital costs and the project costs there. That was reconfirmed through that line of questioning as well to subcommittee that that is the project costs entirely borne by the province through Metrolinx. So the City of Hamilton is not expected to contribute to that. So the further question you're asking, though, is about what happens if through our design work the costs come in beyond what the province's envelope can accommodate, and that is where we would have to look at the scope of the project. If there's no way to fit it within that overall funding envelope, then things like scope or elements of the overall design may have to be reviewed in order to pull it within scope. But those are hypotheticals at the moment, right. But that's the way it would be. The answer we've received repeatedly is that if the cost is higher than the envelope, the answer is not the municipality must cover that cost. The answer is we work through a series of conversations as to how to ensure that the project can continue within the envelope.
Okay. One last question I have, and I didn't have the opportunity. I'd had the opportunity, but I forgot to ask it at the subcommittee, and that is there's certainly shock from transit riders that there are no buses in the core. And when I say core, I mean between Wellington and James Street North. And you clearly articulated there will still be buses in the downtown. No one disputes that. And they will be diverted off the main line. I'd like to understand, and I don't need the answer today because I don't think the information. Talk to HSR staff, and I believe that we're currently doing counts. But I'd like to know how many transit riders flow through that area of the city now on King between Wellington. Current configuration of the bus stops and the bus routes that flow into the core. How many transit riders will flow into the core post LRT? I don't need that information today because I think we're still doing counts, but at some point in time, if it could come back to the
Deputy Mayor, we'll take that request away and get that.
Thank you, Councillor Collins. Back